A war of words has erupted between former President Donald Trump and Newark Mayor Ras Baraka over the ongoing issue of migrant deportations. The dispute was triggered by Trump's emergency order that directed the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, to intensify efforts to identify and deport illegal immigrants, particularly those who have overstayed visas or entered the country unlawfully. Mayor Baraka, a vocal critic of the Trump administration's immigration policies, strongly condemned the move, accusing the federal government of overstepping its authority and creating unnecessary fear within migrant communities. Trump's emergency order, which was signed earlier this week, instructs federal agencies, including DHS, to ramp up efforts to conduct widespread immigration enforcement operations. As part of the directive, local law enforcement agencies were asked to help identify individuals in violation of immigration laws. One of the more controversial aspects of the order was the request for civilians, without due cause or prior notification, to voluntarily identify individuals they suspected of being in the country unlawfully. Mayor Baraka, whose administration has been a staunch advocate for immigrant rights and sanctuary city policies, voiced his anger at the policy during a public appearance. He argued that the emergency order placed an undue burden on residents and fostered an environment of fear and distrust. Baraka also denounced the practice of asking everyday citizens to act as immigration informants, claiming that it would lead to racial profiling and unjustly target vulnerable immigrant communities. "This is not how we treat people in our society," Mayor Baraka said. "You can't just ask random people to report others and label them as criminals based on their immigration status. It's un-American and goes against the values of fairness and justice that we hold dear." The mayor's remarks were pointed, highlighting what he called the dangerous precedent that Trump's policy set, suggesting that it could lead to widespread civil rights abuses. Baraka emphasized that Newark has a long history of being a sanctuary city, offering protections to undocumented immigrants and resisting federal immigration enforcement efforts, and he vowed to continue standing up for those rights. He also warned that such policies could drive a wedge between immigrant communities and law enforcement, making it harder for residents to trust authorities in the future. Trump, in turn, defended the actions of DHS, framing the deportation efforts as a necessary part of his administration's broader agenda to secure the U.S. border and uphold the rule of law. In a statement issued through a spokesperson, the former president reiterated his stance that illegal immigration poses a direct threat to the country's safety and economy. "Our borders have been overrun by criminals and people who do not belong here," Trump declared. "These policies are designed to restore order and ensure that those who have no right to be in this country are removed." Mayor Baraka's objections are simply political grandstanding. The American people overwhelmingly support stronger border enforcement and legal immigration processes. The back and forth between Trump and Baraka comes at a time when immigration remains one of the most divisive issues in U.S. politics. Under the Trump administration, immigration policy became a flashpoint for controversy, with measures such as the zero-tolerance policy, which led to the separation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border, and the controversial travel ban targeting several predominantly Muslim countries. Trump's hardline approach to immigration is a defining feature of his political legacy, one that continues to resonate with his supporters, but also draws fierce opposition from those who advocate for more inclusive and humane policies. Baraka's opposition to the deportation measures is part of a broader response from progressive mayors and local officials in cities across the country who have pushed back against the Trump administration's aggressive stance on immigration. Many of these officials argue that local law enforcement should not be used as an extension of federal immigration enforcement, fearing that it could lead to racial profiling and strain relationships between immigrant communities and the police. Moreover, critics argue that such actions do little to address the root causes of illegal immigration, such as poverty, violence, and instability in the countries from which migrants are fleeing. The debate has also sparked a wider conversation about the role of local governments in enforcing federal immigration laws. While sanctuary cities like Newark have long resisted cooperating with federal immigration authorities, other cities and states have taken a different approach, offering greater cooperation with federal agencies in exchange for certain benefits. This has led to a patchwork of policies across the country, with varying degrees of compliance or resistance to federal immigration enforcement. The issue of deportations, particularly under the Trump administration, has been deeply polarizing. Proponents of stricter immigration controls argue that deportations are necessary to protect American jobs and national security, while opponents contend that deportations tear apart families and disproportionately affect communities of color. The human toll of deportations is often a central point of contention, with critics highlighting the emotional and psychological impacts on individuals who are torn from their homes and families, sometimes after living in the U.S. for many years. In recent years, the broader discourse surrounding immigration has shifted somewhat, with increasing calls for comprehensive immigration reform. This includes not only measures to improve border security, but also provisions for the legal status of millions of undocumented immigrants who have lived in the U.S. for decades. Advocates for reform stress that deportation alone is not a sustainable solution and that the U.S. must find ways to address the needs of its immigrant population in a more just and humane manner. As tensions between Trump and Barack continue to simmer, the broader implications for the future of immigration policy in the U.S. remain unclear. With a new administration potentially on the horizon, the issue of how to handle deportations and immigration enforcement is likely to be a key point of debate in the upcoming election cycle. Whether Trump's tough stance on immigration will resonate with voters, or whether calls for a more compassionate approach will gain traction remains to be seen. In the meantime, local officials like Mayor Baraka are continuing to fight for what they see as the protection of immigrant communities and the principles of justice and equality.